What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the latest Monday night edition here on the OBR's YouTube and Twitch stream. So welcome everybody in. I'm not sure which one you're on, but whatever platform you're finding us, thanks for checking in. We have draft week here. So with draft week means that we're going to have a bunch of topics to talk about. And we have a great list of questions that I want to run through with these guys. And in the process of going through some of these questions, if you guys have some questions yourself you would like to ask, feel free to do so. We have plenty of content to go over. If you missed what's going on at the OBR's website today, we have a wide variety of content posted, including the latest mock draft. Well, the only mock draft from Pete Smith, who's with us tonight. We have Pete's mock, which we are going to break down in podcast form for a little bit more inside info. That'll be out on the podcast format tomorrow. We'll get a lot of Pete's thoughts in this conversation here tonight about some of the guys that he likes that are going to be in that mock draft. If you have not read it, check it out and do so. We have the latest on scouting reports from top 30 visits from Ian Valentino, who is with us, who's done a great job with some draft content for us stepping in this year. So we're greatly looking forward to looking at his insights on these important topics. And then Brad Ward is with us as well from the OBR here. Brad has put out a ton of great draft content, does his own show on Tuesday night with us, and is consistently looking at the roster, I think, in a way that is going to, evoke some great discussion. So I brought these three guys on to go through some, I think, buzz questions that are coming up here, and we're going to jump into it. Let's see here. So we're going to dive into some of these questions. I want to make sure that, again, you guys fire over any questions that you feel like. I'm going to try to just keep everybody muted until you're up. The first question I'm going to throw it over to, we'll go to Pete. We'll start with you at the top here. Pete, is there a position that you feel at the top of this thing or Andrew Berry must address? Any position you feel must be addressed in this draft? And if there is a position you're preferring to, is there somebody you like as a fit at that position?
Offensive line for the future is the biggest thing for me. Getting out ahead of what they have to deal with in terms of future contracts. Jedrick Wills on the last year of his deal. Joe Bitonio potentially year to year at this point, with perhaps retiring at some point. Wyatt Teller's got 2 years left on his deal. And then Jack Conklin's got 2 years left, but who knows where that's going to go with his health. So they've really got to start getting ahead of it. They've got to deal with the fact that they are shifting a lot of the money towards skilled positions, which is good, but you have to be able to get it from somewhere, and offensive line stands out. I really like Kingsley Suamataia for the Browns specifically. I would not suggest him for a team that needs him to play this year because I don't think he's anywhere near ready. But elite size, athletic traits, just needs a lot of work. I like Karan Amagaji, the offensive lineman from Yale. I'm open to the idea that he could play tackle or guard. So if you were able to get a tackle first, or you get a tackle somewhere else, you feel good, I would have no problem getting Amagaji to be that left guard of the future because, one, he's played it, and two, he's just really powerful at the point of attack for a guy you want to have double teams and do some of those things. So those guys stand out. I like Blake Fisher apparently more than some people do. It's hard to argue with his resume. There is inconsistency. There is hip tightness. There are some things, but I also look at him as a guy who's only going to get bigger and stronger and better with time. He's only 21.
Good stuff, Pete. Over to you, Brad. Is there a position you're honed in on that you're, trying to find maybe a prospect that fits to?
Line with what Pete was saying, I do believe that probably offensive line, but more specifically for me, tackle, just because of the transition they're going to make from 24 to 25 would be beautiful if they could go from sinking all this money into the offensive line for years and years and years to transitioning to now where they're spending some money at wide receiver, and they're probably going to want to spend some money some other places. If you could come out in 2025 and have DeJuan Jones and another guy on a rookie deal starting at tackle and then playing effectively without a huge drop-off, I think that would be a massive win. There's there's a range of guys from like 54 to 85 that, I like for that. And along with Sua Mataya, and I'm a big fan of Blake Fisher, but Roger Rosengarten, Patrick Paul, and then Omega G as well. But from that range, 54 to 85, I like all those guys. I think there's a little bit of a drop off after that. After that group of names there. So if you're going to get one that you think can probably start in 25, I think that's where the range you want to get them.
Ian, I'm curious how you feel about some of those guys too. I mean, coming from deep prospect study you've been doing throughout the entire class. I know we haven't gotten all of that from you a little bit over at Pro Football Network there, but yeah, enlighten us, man, on sort of if you're with those guys on the prospects they've mentioned, or if there's someone we might be leaving off.
Yeah, I think a lot of those guys make sense. And some of that, like you said, is the positional versatility, like being able to move them inside. The Browns have that luxury, then a lot of teams don't have. Like a lot of teams are looking at this and saying, I got to plug someone in right now. And if we take someone day 3 or even, top 100, that's the crazy thing about the position is sometimes these guys just end up being high-end backups. And when they hit the field, it's just not really there. This class is unique in that sense where they're going to be able to find hopefully a contributor even on day 3. Guards, that's a little bit more likely, but I think that tide is turning a little bit. So I would agree with the guys, tackle, guard, both equally huge positions of need. I like the guys that they named too. And, Brandon Coleman, someone like that, if they're looking at a guard, I think makes a lot of sense if they're going to take him pretty early compared to what maybe some people expect. If they're looking more day 3 developmental type, like Frank Crum out of Wyoming is interesting. Nathan Thomas out of Louisiana is pretty interesting. Those are big guys, athletic guys who tested. But it's going to be a matter of like, are they more concerned at left tackle or are they more concerned at guard? To me, that's the storyline in this draft. If they're not concerned about Wills and they just feel like he's going to be the guy and they plan on extending him, well, that totally changes everything, right? Because then it's going to be a bigger shift on guard, and then they can probably wait a little bit because that position's been devalued. So I think that tackle is a pretty big need. I'm with the guys here, but at the same time, and they're going to have their choice, right? Like whether it's at 54 or the next round, there's going to be someone. There always is for as much of a tackle run as we're expecting to see. But they may not feel like that's a need at all.
Yeah, curiosity is like stuck around some of those premium positions. And the other one that gets a lot of attention here, there's really 2, which we'll get to those 2, but focusing on wide receiver, there's a chance that you see some teams, maybe you have that run on tackles late in the first round, and then you see some of the early second round, like, oh, there are all of these wide receivers sitting here where like maybe 6 through 10 are gone. And I'll start with you, Ian, because you kind of have, you're unmuted, to be frank. Who is the guy? Like, is there a couple guys you like at 54 if they're there? Like, who stands out to you as a Browns fit wide receiver wise if they're to pull the trigger at that spot, that you'd leave that spot being like, that's a pretty solid pick for what they need?
Yeah, it's probably not as much of a need after the Judy trade, but I still think we talk about like the contracts that are at the position. You're always looking for an upgrade, and I think competition for that 4th, 5th, 6th wide receiver spot is important because it's going to become potentially wide receiver 2 next year. We don't know exactly how this room is going to evolve, and so I'm definitely keeping an eye open. I think Ladd McConkey is probably a little bit far fetched. I think he's going to go a little bit too early. So maybe you look at someone like Jalen Polk out of Washington. He's got size. He doesn't really have the elite trait, and I think that's my concern with him. But he's a really good football player. Broke out a little bit late. Broke out late in the terms of like 2023, but that's not late in his career. He's only a 4th-year sophomore. So I think he's right on schedule, but he's got the skill set. He brings something new to the table, but is he too similar to Cedric Tillman? So that's my concern with going with some of these bigger receivers, or do they want to go with someone that truly seems to fit the team with like Roman Wilson, Malachi Corley, a little bit of the smaller guys, bring a little bit of a different element to things. Corley is very much his own weapon. He is Deebo Samuel's always the comp, right? He's not Deebo Samuel, but he is in the same vein of like, that's how you're going to use him. You're going to kind of be what Elijah Moore was supposed to be, but Elijah Moore is not that player, right? Like people thought Elijah Moore was X, and he's not X. He's something different. And so Corley is the idea of what Moore is supposed to be. Roman Wilson's more of a pure guy, inside, outside, brings that speed. I think Wilson is really nice to me. He's the guy that if he's there, I would definitely consider him. I don't know that he's going to be a wide receiver 1 any day, but I could see him being a wide receiver 2 and really complementing the offense in a nice way because he can move all around.
Good stuff, Ian. Brad, over to you. Is there a guy that you are in love with the idea of taking at 54, like a dream guy? Like, I think Ian did a good job of giving us some realistic outcomes there. Is there somebody who, like, I cannot believe that guy's on the board at 54 as a wide receiver you just would be fascinated, thrilled to take?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of picked all over the place. I think it actually is more realistic than maybe we think, but Xavier Legette, I think, is just, I mean, he is kind of like, you can't help but think like DK Metcalf, like, what are people missing? What am I missing here? Why is he not valued higher, I guess? Along with the same body type, though, like Malachi Corley is right there, the same thing, your 200-pound plus wide receiver. And the same thing with Keon Coleman. Like, any of those guys, I feel like are pretty elite athletes that maybe, for one reason or another are not as high as the elite guys in this class and really could be there. And I don't really know why they should be at 54. So really all three of those, I think, would bring the Browns something they don't have in the wide receiver room.
I think, Pete, you're a little, we've gone through this a little bit on your end, where between your mock and some conversations about the first round and wide receiver, maybe perhaps next year, not forcing that pick, but is there a guy, like I asked Brad there, kind of where he makes a ton of sense for you if he's like, again, it's a situation where I kind of can't believe that guy's available, but he's sitting there, because I don't think that there's a reach desire from anybody here, but I think the flavor of these guys gets a little different from evaluator to evaluator.
I think the guy that the Browns would like to be there is Troy Franklin from Oregon. In a lot of ways, he's sort of like Jerry Jeudy, but I think and I think most people are hoping that he has more viability as a pure outside receiver. Like, he has more answers to deal with press than a guy like Jerry Jeudy has shown to this point. Elite downfield threat, obviously needs to get thicker. There's some concerns with him, but the combine did not help, the gauntlet drill that people will never forget. But you put on the tape, just production. He was one of the best in the country, without question. I think the question you sort of run into with this is, let's say you take a guy at 54, a receiver, and I should preface it by saying the Browns should take a receiver if they love the player. Like, let's not suggest that they should pass on a guy because they're like, yeah, but we're kind of full up at that position. But we're just going to pass on something else. Like, that's silly. If he's the best guy, take him. But you do run into a very real problem where that guy could be the right pick at 54 and be wide receiver 5 this year, which is unsatisfying from a process standpoint. The other thing you're probably running into, and even Troy Franklin's probably a victim of this, there's no number one receiver that you're going to get at 54. And for the Browns, you need to be looking for the next wide receiver run. Even if you extend Amari Cooper, that still has to be in the back of your mind. You've just signed wide receiver 2 for the next several years with Jerry Jeudy. You've got Cedric Tillman, and who knows what he will be. But if he's a good player, that's another guy on that sort of chain. Whereas you need to find a guy where you're sitting there taking swings at players that can theoretically be the dude on your team. And my hope is that, you don't take a receiver at 54 and then you sit there coming back next year. And obviously next year is a year away and all that. But you're now in a position where you could go up and get that guy, and you're sitting there going, well, we just took this guy. I don't know if we feel good about it. So you almost end up in this position where part of me feels like if you don't take that receiver at 54, 85 that you feel really, really good about, I almost wonder if you should bother, because then, the other part is if they get buried, they almost feel invalidated the next year, because everybody's going to be, well, now's our chance to go get that big time player. And it may still work out. That still may be the right choice. But there's this weird sort of situation where they've got a lot of guys. If you just go across the league, the Browns have a good wide receiver room, and some of that is theoretical, but Elijah Moore had a career high in yardage and they didn't know how to use him for half a year. Cedric Tillman earned his way on the field, and yes, there's some things that he needs to address, but he has an NFL body and an NFL skill set. He could, if he figures out the rest, he could be a very productive player. Jerry Jeudy, the Browns are telling us he's entering his prime. He's going to be a premium player. And then until Amari Cooper slows down, they're not going to I don't get the sense the Browns are going to be like, we're going to get out of this a year early as opposed to a year late. And he's coming off arguably the best season of his career.
Yeah, the wide receiver stuff where you can shift focus to like figuring out who matters this year and who has a future, who has a contract brewing from their performance this year, and then look at what do we do with the first round premium selection next year on that premium position, definitely carries merit to me. So the other, it's premium positions are relative some people to some people, but I believe defensive tackle very much to be in that group. And it seems like the most popular spot to be mocked to the Browns, whether it's, I think we've seen Mike Hall get some attention at 54. We've seen probably Chris Jenkins get more attention than anybody at that spot. And then we've obviously seen Mason Smith make this rise in the last week. His agent is just working overtime here to get his name in front of more and more eyeballs. But like, the question I have is when you look at the Browns defensive tackle room, and I understand this group is largely outside of Dalvin Tomlinson, like a year-to-year group between Hurst and Jefferson, all these others, right? And then you have invested for your sake of selection available, the premium pick for the Browns last year in Siaki Ika, who you probably don't love the idea of coming off of after just one season. But there is talent here. I don't think any of us can ignore that at 54, there's probably going to be a decent player at that spot. But the thing you're weighing is when you look at some of the best defensive tackles in the NFL, it seems like those guys are coming from the first or early second round. So I think this is a position kind of like wide receiver where Andrew Berry has this idea from folks that he can't really necessarily hit on these positions. But if you look at what the investment has been in terms of premium assets, they haven't been there. So I guess where I'm going with this is like, and Pete, we'll go to you first. Are they nervous about defensive tackle? Like, should you feel okay if they take a Chris Jenkins or a Mike Hall? I think, listen, I don't want anything to do with Mason Smith, but there's a group of folks that like him. If they go a different route, right? Like Ohorohoro, like if whatever route they go, there are some names there outside of Byron Murphy and Jer'Zhan Newton that are going to probably be first round guys. Like, who are you saying at 54? I know 85 is too far out. 54 is the one that compels me most here. Are you saying at 54 there's someone you like there enough to maybe disrupt the current flow of the 53 and say, we're going to create a situation where there's some decisions that have to be made about the immediate roster structure? Because it's an interesting group sitting there at 54 that could be available to you.
Look, anytime you can take the third best LSU defensive tackle, you do it. You take them first. You get them before anyone else. I understand he has a body. He's athletic. There's things there. But like we talk about risk assessment, he has not proven anything, and he has a serious injury. Like, these are the things where those are the picks that get you in trouble. Like, nothing against Mason Smith. Maybe that works. Maybe that's a good swing for somebody else. I don't like it. And the biggest reason I don't like Mason Smith, I'm not convinced he can beat out Maurice Hurst for that spot, which why would I use a third round pick to do that? So that's one problem. Chris Jenkins is the one that's sort of weird to me. I understand people like Dane Brugger are like, look, this is what Michigan's defense asked him to do, but I think he's better at doing what the Browns want him to do. I have a difficult time without the evidence. He was not very productive for Michigan. And you don't really hold this against him because Mike Hall sort of falls in the same bucket. He didn't play a lot of snaps because they were so spoiled. They have arguably the best defensive tackle in the country for next year. And then another guy, a couple, who may be pretty good too. So
first rounder.
Those are things that you have to weigh. And are the Browns like trying to jump on the third best defensive tackle at Michigan? And maybe they're just that good. Maybe Michigan has assembled a crew that is just so good that you're going to take them. But I get worried with those type of things. And don't get me wrong, Chris Jenkins, outstanding athletic profile. And there are some things there that you have to take seriously. But again, we come back to the same conversation of who's going to beat out Maurice Hurst. Mike Hall is the one that stands out because he does what Maurice Hurst does, and he's 20. Like, that is the easiest sort of, you look at this and you go, they're the same guy, except Mike has longer arms. Mike has not had the injury history that Maurice Hurst has had. And there are questions with him. Again, he missed time didn't play a ton of snaps. He's a specialist, which is not unlike what Maurice Hurst is. And his production isn't great, but you sort of counterbalance that by his efficiency. Like when he was on the field, he got a ton of pressure. When he was on the field, he made a lot of tackles. And you can find, dominant traits, that arm over move that you sit there and go, man, that's really compelling. He dominated the Senior Bowl. He dominated against 35-year-old Michigan linemen. He played really well against Notre Dame as a junior, who at that point had arguably the best line in the country. So he's a guy where I sit there and go, okay, I can see it. The Browns have to weigh that risk of the other things I'm talking, that we're considering here. And they've apparently been interested enough, and understandably, that they had him in for a visit. So like, he's a guy where I sit there and go, I can totally understand why they would go, we're going to take him and we will either trade or otherwise find a place for Maurice Hurst at the end of training camp, assuming all these guys get through healthy, which is one of the reasons like Maurice Hurst makes you nervous. I never would have expected the Browns get 13 games out of him last year. I'm not confident they're going to get a meaningful amount of games out of him this year, even though he was outstanding for what they gave him. So those are considerations. Rook Ororo is pretty good. I don't love him. I think he needs another year, and that's sort of the problem. If you're the Browns, this whole conversation comes up because if you look at the Browns depth chart and you just go, they've got Siaki Ika and a whole bunch of old guys. And it's very easy to look at that and go, well, where does this go from here? Even though the Browns have sort of been doing this dance where they can keep bringing in these 30, guys who are 30 plus. And it's difficult to sort of project that forward. And you want to naturally say, well, they need to get younger guys because they have this. I'm not convinced the Browns aren't confident they can keep rolling this.
Right. Brad, I guess we're looking at like, is there somebody that you would pound the table for at that spot that you fully believe in the stuff that you've seen? We'll go to you first, Brad, then Ian on the same topic. Because Pete laid the landscape out of that defensive tackle room, I think, out pretty cleanly. It's just a matter of like, if you're at 54, you're in love with a guy at that spot, at that position, because you definitely, and again, this is most positions they have, but you don't need to force one at that spot. That's for certain.
I'm kind of the belief, and even digging into like some stuff this offseason, that it is just really hard to draft defensive tackles, even outside of the first 2 rounds. The transition to the NFL is difficult, the changing of the body, the nuance to the game. It's kind of like the Browns have all these upper 20 guys that they sign in free agency, but it's kind of weird. That's when guys get to be like their best at defensive tackle. It's almost like their prime. It takes them some years in the league to understand how to play the position differently, their body to kind of grown man strength, and fill out properly. So I'm not a huge fan of taking a defensive tackle unless you're like really in the first round and you're taking a premium pick with them. Like I'm not, these depth picks at defensive tackle are kind of flyers to me. I'm not in love with this class either, really. So I'm really good on defensive tackle. I wouldn't draft one this year, Jake.
Right on. Okay. Yeah, I can certainly understand that sentiment. It just feels to me like a popular spot where people doing mocks, looking at the roster, feel compelled to make that mesh. You look at people doing the 7-round mocks, which are hard. They're challenging to look at 32 rosters and try to slate players. But that's a position it feels like they're like, oh, Browns could probably use some youth there. And this is a spot that kind of meshes with Chris Jenkins and Mike Hall and some of the above. So
yeah, it appears to be a need from outside. I get that.
Right on. And Pete laid that out too well. Like they've been playing the 30-year shuffle on these guys, right? This is a position that seems like more than just about any other in the league right now. You bloom later, and you kind of hit 30 as a defensive tackle, and you're almost finding your niche, and you can get some good value for some of these guys. Ian, is there a guy you love at 54? Or are you more compelled to swing a little later on? But even though that sounds good in theory, it's like, man, not many of these. I mean, there's not many Grady Jarretts floating out there later in the draft.
So spoiler, I finished up my 7-round mock actually earlier today. And so I sat on the board, and like you said, like when you're doing this for 32 teams and you're trying to, account for everyone's needs, that's where I came to 54 and I took Michael Hall. And it's the same thinking where it's like, I know it's not a need in 2024, but it's one of those things where 2-3 years down the line, because he is so young, this could be a really good pick. And I think that the Browns roster is in this spot where they can finally look at the roster and develop for multiple years at a time. But it's not the pick that I necessarily wanted. It's nothing against Hall. It's the exact same things that you guys said. But Rook is 24, whereas Hall is a couple years younger. I love Tavondre Sweat, and he might now be available at 54. I don't love Tavondre Sweat personality and the things that he's going through right now that we've kind of heard about. And that's going to be part of the thing is like, do you trust that type of person? I don't know. And that's not the question that I can answer, but like that scares me away. I would love someone like Brandon Dorless out of Oregon, but like he's not a pure 3 technique. So what type of vision do they have for the defense? How creative are they willing to get? That might determine it a little bit. But for me, it was a convenient pick because none of the receivers that we talked about besides Polk was on the board for me. When I was doing this, I felt like it was a little bit of a reach for the next offensive tackle because I'm a trench guy. Like I appreciate good tackles and I think teams should be taking more tackles. So I got to 54 and I was like, well, I'm either reaching on a guy that I have like a 4th round grade on, or I'm going to just take the best player on my board, or maybe I take a running back. And It just didn't feel right. So I think that you do kind of have to either make that pick at 54 or you just pass on it until late day 3. And then you're taking an athletic flyer, a guy who's going to pretty much end up on the practice squad unless if there's an injury.
And that thought process you're talking through there is a little bit of how we arrived to the spot of like, what kind of calls have we had on pick 54, right? Maybe your board is emptied from guys you had in the 54 range over the course of 3 picks leading up. And then you're working the phones trying to figure out if that right offer has been put in front of you. And sometimes they come together and you're able to make that trade and move down. Sometimes they don't come together and you're forced to maybe overextend yourself because you have to pick at 54 in some fashion, right? So that's where it's a little bit tricky because we're going to be sweating bullets when the Eagles and Steelers are up right in front of you the way that they are. It's not going to be a very fun few minutes if there's a prospect or two that we as the fan base and people evaluating this really love, right? Now, the question you mentioned, Ian, running back, I think most of us feel like Nick is going to be back in some capacity this year. I think the safer bet for everybody's emotional tie to Nick and the situation is to under promise, right, the situation here and hope for an over delivery. You shouldn't be that optimistic about this season. If he delivers because he's Nick Chubb and he's an unbelievable athlete and worker, that'd be great. But I think the expectation should be low. Having said that, you do look at what they have. And again, it's Nyheim Hines coming off of his own ACL recovery. And then it's like Jerome Ford again. It's like they added Deontay Foreman, who's nice, has a chance to be an effective player for them. But the running back stuff is valid. It's a question of where. This is another position where folks look at this situation doing 7 rounders and they're giving the Browns a back. I've seen it as early as 54. We've seen it more often at 85. And the question I have for all 3 of you, which I will get to you quickly, is like, is there a guy at 54? Like that would even is there a guy at 54 if the Browns took them? You probably don't agree with it. I wouldn't take a guy at 54. But if they decided to take a back at 54, who is the back at 54 for you? That's the question for all 3 of you to answer in some capacity. I'll go to you first, Ian, and then we'll talk about 85 from everybody a little later, and then maybe a late guy, because it just feels like people are trying to put that thing into play. And it's like, is there even a guy at 54 that's worth it?
Yeah, great question. And you kind of mentioned it, like the team's picking right before Cleveland. Picks I had right before: Roman Wilson, Blake Fisher, Malachi Corley, Edrin Cooper. So like where, if things go that way, it leaves the Browns in a really weird spot. And then 2 picks later, I have Trey Benson and going to Dallas. And so I think if I'm going to take a running back there, I shy away from it. But if they take Trey Benson, to me, he makes a lot of sense. It's a big pick, right? Because of the Chubb situation. And you might end up kind of losing value on that pick if Chubb ends up being the guy that we know that he is, at least for the next year or 2. So it might be a little bit rich, but to me, it's Trey Benson. I wouldn't consider any other back for Cleveland, just considering the roster, the depth, the talent in the class. I like some of the guys in the class, but to me, if you're going to have a running back 1 from this class, and you're not going to take the guy coming off a torn ACL, Jonathan Brooks. He's a really good talent, but that would be kind of funny. I wouldn't reach on Brooks for Cleveland's needs. But I think that Benson would make sense because he could step in and has a lot of what Cleveland likes.
I mean, there's a chance we're talking about this is the first running back selected at 54, like in the entirety of the draft. Do you have a 2nd round grade on Benson to justify that feeling?
I do, yeah. And I think it's because of his explosiveness. Just look at his advanced stats. Like, he's got it. But what does that mean? He's not Saquon Barkley as a prospect, right? But a second round grade to me means really good starter in the right situation. So for me, that's still probably as high as I get on a running back anymore. Like I've had guys with higher grades, but the value there is not going to be significantly different. Like I'm not going to have like a top 10 running back overall ever.
Right. Gotcha. Good stuff. Pete, over to you. And it's okay to, like Brad said, I don't want anything to do with that if that's where you're lying.
And I worry, like, I can appreciate Trey Benson's talent, but you have to be okay with the fact that he's not a full-time dude. Like, has never been a full-time guy, has averaged slightly under 12 carries per game for his career at Florida State. And taking that at 54, like, if he is that dynamic and he's that big home run hitter, which he's shown he has the ability to be, you might be fine with that. But, like, that's part of the problem is I think you look at these guys and you're sitting there going, I'm taking a running back in round 2. He better be the dude. And I'm not there with those guys. But my running back 1 is I'm basically on an island over here. I would not take him at 54, but it's Audric Esteem. I love Audric Esteem. What part of the reason I love Audric Esteem is you can see some Nick Chubb in his game. He sets up his feet. He avoids taking big hits and just does little things that set him up for success. He is an explosive athlete. Like, people are very worried about the 4.71 at the combine. They're focusing on the wrong thing. Like, that is not good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and go, 4.71, yay, let's go. But it's his explosive ability. That's what he is. He's a power back. And there is a Derrick Henry-like quality in the negative way, and that it sort of takes him a couple steps to get going. And that's where you get worried about, is that if he gets hit in the backfield like Derrick Henry would, then you're going to get knocked for a loss. But when he gets those legs churning, he's phenomenal. His explosive run rate is one of the best in the class for a guy who's not fast. And you watch games where he plays Ohio State. It became like, there are guys, like I would compare Blake Corum. Blake Corum was a guy that sort of carries a tag of gets stronger as the game wears on. I think some of Blake Corum's getting stronger as the game wears on is the fact that he's got about 6 linemen in this draft that we're wearing on the opponent. And Blake Corum has phenomenal feet, phenomenal vision and feel for the position. But I don't get the sense that he's the one punishing these guys as a runner. You watch Ohio State against Audric Esteem, they got very sick of tackling that young man. He just beat people up. And he's, again, 20. I think he's got better hands than maybe it showed in college. He was in an offense that basically never gave him the ball in that capacity. But, I'm again, not interested in taking him there. I'm probably not even interested in taking him at 85, even though I'd be, thrilled to have him. I just like the way he plays. But that's sort of what this class is. It's a lot of very talented, either part-time players or guys you hope become a big-time player. I think I've seen more than one place the high-end comparison for Audric Esteem is Carson. I think he can be better than that, but is it going to be enough where you're feeling good about it to the point where he's going to be that primetime guy? Hard to say, but I also like the idea of having the Browns spread teams out, get lighter boxes, and having him just beat the crap out of them from that standpoint. So there's that appeal.
Let me ask you this, Pete, real quick. This doesn't have to be for to take too much of Brad's time either. But if we move back, if they move back, are you taking him at 85? If they move back into the 70s, is that too early? What's too early for your love for him?
Again, if they take him at 85, I will, I'll give a little fist bump. But ultimately, this running back class in general, I want to be in the 4th round, which the Browns don't have a pick for. And what I sort of fear overall, and sort of what I've been projecting with, is between 85 and 156, the running back class is going to be gone. And what you're going to end up with is where the talent really flattens out. Now, the good news is there are about 2 or 3 dozen guys in this area. And I think there are going to be players you can find in that mix that can be good even after the draft.
Yeah.
They may not be stars, but I think you're going to get starters from there. But I think there's a very real possibility that unless the Browns trade back get that 4th round pick, that they're just going to sort of pass on this class, maybe with a little bit of an eye to next year where you've got 3 guys who go to schools that start with O that are all phenomenal talents just at the top of the class. But just, I also think there's an element to this where I understand Andrew Berry was in the front office when they took Nick Chubb, and there may be a scenario where they're willing to take that pick again and make that high premium pick. But he's made it pretty clear he'd rather get the good lineman and have the back sort of be a product of the blocking as opposed to the back make the offensive line.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned it there. I think it's important to illuminate that this has a chance to be a really fun UDFA running back class. And the Browns haven't really invested in a UDFA at that position in a meaningful way. So I hope they take advantage of that if they don't find one that fits. Is there a guy you've loved, Brad, looking at the running back class that you'd be interested in at 54 or 85 even at that spot?
There we go. Yeah, I mean, I like the running back. Trey Benson is exciting to me. Like Jalen Wright, is that his name, right? Yeah.
Yep, you got it. Tennessee
yeah, Jalen Wright is exciting to me. Like, but I don't want to take him at 54. I don't want to really take him at 85. Like the room they have right now, I'm okay with. Like, running back by committee, Chubb's coming back at some point. You have Foreman, who I think is a formidable runner between the tackles, probably underrated in a big way. I'm totally fine with Jerome Ford, who I'm hoping takes another step forward. I think that the Browns are higher on Ford than a lot of the fans are probably. So I think that's what they're going back to. I would rather them, to be honest, Jake, take a shot on a guy like Jace McClellan in the 7th round with 243, or even a UDFA that you really like if he's there. You mentioned a couple guys that might be there that, maybe they're a scat back, or they bring something like, Mitchell did for the Ravens last year. There's a couple guys like that are fun guys that you could take as UDFAs. I'd rather do that and take a different position in this draft because I'm fine with the committee they have, and Chubb eventually is going to be part of that committee and then hopefully, take the head of it. But, it seems like a lot of guys in that room and nobody worth spending that capital on when you're already shorthanded. I will say this real quick. If they trade back, you talked about the difference in all the running backs being gone between 85 and 156. I think they're more likely to trade back from 85 than 54. If you do the math on it, you can get back into the 4th round with 85 going back and getting like something in the late 90s and the mid 100s. So, I feel like that would almost be make more sense is to stay at 54 and trade back out of 85 and get back in the 4th round that way.
It's amazing they haven't in 2 years made a pick in the 50s. That's like they pushed themselves into the 3rd round the last 2 years and come out with good talents, right? So I think you guys both answered Jason McClellan. I know, Pete, that was a running back that you put in your recent mock, right? Yeah, there you go. Is there a guy, Ian, late that you like at that position, a running back that you would be compelled to maybe 150 in the 150s or even those early 200s they have?
I have the Browns taking Jalen Wright at number 85. So it's kind of funny that but it didn't feel like the right value though either. And so I'm right on board with you guys. I think if you're looking at that day 3, maybe you take someone like Isaac Guerrero from Louisville. Didn't play a whole lot, but he really lit up the combine, and he's got the size, he's got the speed. Love those things. Tyrone Tracy Jr. I'm looking at these upside guys. I want some of these guys that come in with that explosiveness that you can maybe find on day 3, and they're a little bit more than what you saw in college, and you want like their best days ahead of them. Amani Bailey, TCU, he would have to be like a late rounder, probably UDFA type. I really like what he showed on tape, but then he goes to the combine and absolutely stinks it up. So like what happened there? But that's why you take these guys as a late rounder. Rasheen Ali too, out of Marshall, saw a lot of him. He's got speed. There's smaller guy, 206 pounds. So he might just be someone that challenges Jerome Ford. But that's what this class is. There's so many sub 200 pound guys in this class that there's not really a lot of candidates for someone that's going to come in and really surprise you too much. But can you find a valuable role player? Yeah, I think so. So I think there are a couple guys that I would take. I think Kendall Milton and Jace McClellan are kind of interesting too, as familiar SEC types. I'm really interested to see where they go. Like, are those the guys that get reached for because they're just familiar names and they have the big 220-pound frame, as opposed to like these 190-pounders that are, more scat backs.
Good stuff. Okay, so I want to switch it because there's a couple angles here that we haven't hit on before we get out of here. We've sort of hit on the popular Browns positional groups, but I think a couple of them sit out there that I want to ask you guys about that are probably fine. But if you found a guy who can play, he can play this year. He can find the field. The first one I look at is linebacker. And I think that there's an obvious path at 54 to like some talented dudes. I don't even want to name them because I want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about them. But if the Browns go the route of linebacker at 54, are you in love with any of them that are coming into this? Like, felt like last year there were some guys in the second round that ended up like Jack Hamill ended up being a first rounder. I don't think we're going to get that kind of surprise from the guys at the top of the group. But when you look at like, okay, our most important pick, we could potentially do what some other teams in this division have done, which is invest in linebacker in a meaningful way with multiple talents. The Bengals have done it. Steelers did it unsuccessfully, but then they just re-up their investment in a sense. And we know the Ravens have done it too. And maybe the Ravens are in that market again as they watch Patrick Queen go elsewhere. But that's one that is compelling to me of like, obviously they have Jordan Hicks, who they brought in to anchor Mike. But like, if there's a player they draft that can do that role too, the idea of JOK on a second contract and a talented Mike next to him for a cheap deal is compelling. So I really am looking for, if you guys are in love with either, I mean, I'm not going to say Peyton Wilson because I just think you're pushing the injury and the age guardrail stuff a little too far, but you're talking Edgerrin Cooper, you're talking Junior Colson. Some people like Jeremiah Trotter. I don't know. That's more of like an 85 field to me, but that could be wrong. I'm interested in opinions on this because that is a position I see where there's like a pathway to, if this guy is made ready to go, it's a non-premium spot that teams could be kind of pushing it out a little bit. And there could be a top of the class type of talent at that position. So Brad, is there either of those guys or anyone I'm forgetting here that you love?
The only guy that I think is worthy of 54 is Cooper. I think he's fun. I think he was probably one of the funnest watches, that I have dived into. I think he would be worth it for the reasons that you said. Now, the question for me is, do the Browns value him? Like, it took a lot for them to take a linebacker, even in the second round with JOK. It took him falling all the way out of the first round, them trading up to get him. Like, did they value Cooper or Colson like they did JOK? I don't think so. I do think Cooper's a special player, and I see, like, the path to the field there and the impact that could have. I just don't know how the front office views this, right? Like, or I kind of shy away of thinking that they would actually pull the trigger here on a linebacker.
Yeah, right. I think that the two guys that we're talking about at the top here are talented enough, right? I think the problem with Colson is probably didn't test, which doesn't help his situation. The film is great. The tackling is great. He's a downhill Mike, but does that value spot hit 54, Pete? Do you like that type of player at that spot? Or are you drawn to saying, I would rather punt on that and find something at a different, more premium position in that?
I would rather do just about anything than take a linebacker. But let's start with Junior Colson. He does a lot of things well other than the job, tackling. There's just not much production there. I mean, it's frustrating. And you can do the thing where you go, well, their defense was so good he didn't have to tackle. Dudes get tackles. It's just how it goes. And he doesn't have much. And you can, very raw ability. He's got that added size. But I have questions for him. I think Cooper is the best of those. But here's my thing with Cooper. He might be better as an outside linebacker than an inside linebacker. Like, yes, he can play inside linebacker, but like all of his highlights are outside. He does a lot of good stuff. I really like Jeremiah Trotter. He's another guy that did practically no testing. Not the prototypical size you look for. I wouldn't want him at 54, certainly. I'm not sure I'd want him at 85. Another guy where if you can get him a little bit later than that, you're happy. But like his production is out of this world. He dominated, even with, this is what part of the reason I look at Colson is like Clemson has a lot of guys on defense. They have a lot of good defensive linemen. Jeremiah Trotter was dominant in terms of production, out of this world, like with the top guys in recent history. So those are things that I would consider. And the other guy I would throw in there, and I still, again, I all of the like metrics he passes, Cedric Gray from North Carolina, I just don't love the film as much as I'd like to. There's too many missed tackles. He gets caught like going the wrong way at times. But again, a million tackles, gets to the quarterback, has interceptions, does all these things you want in a linebacker. And maybe there's a part of you that goes, well, North Carolina's defense was not very good, and maybe being in a better defense will clean some of that up naturally. But there are some issues, and I thought the Senior Bowl sort of confirmed the issues rather than alleviating them.
Yeah, same thing over to you, Ian. Obviously, just looking at if there's a guy early that would excite you.
Yeah, I'm with these guys. I think there's a lot of good weapons in this group. Guys that you would generally say are either very new age middle linebackers who are rangy, and we're just taking the identity of we don't care about the run game as much, and we just want to be able to space out, and we want to be able to drop two guys into space and let them make plays. Be a really good role for Jeremiah Trotter, because that's what he did. He played off of Barrett Carter, and Barrett Carter was the hammer, and that freed him up to do everything. So unless if the Browns want to do that, I think Peyton Wilson's really the only guy that I've had interest in at that role. And like you said, there's so many issues with him on the table that I'm not sure. And I don't even know if he lasts till 54 either, because if teams are okay with his medical, I think he's going to probably be off the board for them. And the nice thing is, though, it depends. If they want more of that middle linebacker traditional guy, there's actually a bunch of those types that should be available on day 3. Like you got like the Jalen Ford types. These are the big hulking 230, 240 middle linebackers. I'm interested to see if they're just cool with a guy who can be a stopgap between the tackles. Tyron Hopper type out of Missouri, who's really nice. Tyrese Knight out of UTEP, tackling machine, only 233 pounds, which is big nowadays, but in general is not huge for the position. So they're going to have options for those more traditional type of linebackers, and they can take those guys 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. It's just the only way I could see them investing earlier is if they're looking at these other guys that are more athletic and just saying, we're cool with you not being amazing at shedding blocks. We're okay with that. We're going to use you almost as like a pseudo strong safety / 2 outside linebacker system. But I don't see that happening.
Let's talk tight end. Pete, or go ahead, Brad. You had something to add to that?
I just wanted to ask the question on the guys in that range. You mentioned Hopper, but like, what do you guys think of like Curtis Jacobs? And like, he seems like a fun player that's kind of a hybrid-ish, kind of leading towards what the Browns want to do there. I mean, he flies off the edge, can play in coverage. I don't know. He's a guy that I kind of like, along with like a Cedric Gray maybe later in the draft.
Pete, go ahead.
He's got the athletic makeup you want. He's actually, it's weird to say this, that 6'1", like 235 is big, but he is big by those standards. He's been through the Penn State strength and conditioning program, so he's got the athletic traits. I look at there have been a lot of that Penn State linebacker to come through in recent years, and I do think those are guys that are worth taking a flyer on, that were productive enough. The mold, I think the world of Jason Tarver as a linebackers coach. Just give him those type of guys and let him see what he can get out of them, because he's been able to get a lot out of very little investment. You're muted.
I am muted. Too busy muting other people. I want to talk tight end because, Pete, you took Jatavian Sanders at 54 in your mock, and you can go into the full-on explanation of that, but it feels like if you take this is what I'm talking about, like the Browns signed Jordan Akins, and it feels like they haven't really wanted to use him very much. It's like we signed this guy, and we can't find a role for him necessarily. So there is, to me, a pathway. Again, I know tight end's a hard place to get on the field as a young player, but if you draft somebody like Sanders or somebody in that, Ben Sinnott mold, who's a guy that can play, maybe have a role, not a dominant role, but a role right away, there's a chance a guy at 54 there is on the field for them this year. So, talk a little bit about it. Justify, Pete, first. I'll go to you and then go to Ian, then go to Brad. But like justify why you think that selection makes sense for them at 54, where some people might be like, wow, that, that doesn't necessarily mesh with a lot of other folks think about the team.
Part of the reason I like it is because of the Isaiah Likely effect, which I liked Isaiah Likely when he was in the draft. I'm still pissed that the Ravens got him, but that is a dynamic player that causes a lot of mismatch problems, especially when you already have an established tight end with Mark Andrews. There are just not that many defenders that can cover one of those guys, let alone come up with answers for both. And Isaiah Likely was a guy who tested like crap, ran a 4.8. And you look at Dalton Kincaid from last year, who didn't test anything, and was with the Buffalo Bills and with Ken Dorsey, where he was just at, and they had the same situation. They had Dawson Knox as their inline guy. They have a guy like Dalton Kincaid as a space player, who is a very established receiver. Jatavian Sanders, part of the reason you like him, or I like him, I guess, is he's tall enough to be an inline tight end. I understand he is not there yet. Horrific blocker right now. Not for lack of effort. There's just not enough of them yet. But he can be a big wide receiver in that Dalton Kincaid, Isaiah Likely role. And his feel for the position is remarkable to me in understanding how to find the holes in the zone, how to use his body to make difficult catches look easy. He does not drop the ball. He's not afraid to go for the big play either. The athleticism is a question. He didn't test as well as I think a lot of people expected him to. Certainly did worse than I thought he would do. But nevertheless, you watch him on the field. He does a lot of good stuff. And one of the concerns with him is he has not forced a lot of missed tackles, which is true. He hasn't, which is concerning. But I do feel like with a guy like Sanders, one, you are bringing him to a team with Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, and David Njoku. So he's potentially the sixth guy. And it just allows him to get on the field in situations where he's playing in a role that makes sense for him. He's executing an assignment that he's good at, as opposed to being forced on the field and trying to figure some stuff out, which allows him to sort of potentially be a nice little highlight for you. But I do feel like he's a year early relative to where teams want to get him. And I think if he had stayed in Texas another year, and I understand next year's tight end class is very good, that I do feel like, one, he'd be stronger, and two, even better production-wise. His production was out of this world. And he dominated in games against big-time opponents. Alabama, Washington, the Big 12 championship game, had his biggest games against the biggest opponents. I think the Browns want to be able to create as many mismatch dynamics as they can. Being able to go from a big personnel group to then having a bunch of speedy guys run out there caused a lot of problem. Kevin Stefanski likes to sort of wrench on teams until he can find that weakness. For example, you put Njoku and Sanders on one side of the formations, potentially flexed out next to each other, and Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy on the other side of the formation. I want to know what the defense is going to do to that, because there's just a lot of potential for problems to be had there. Jatavian Sanders gets to develop at his own pace, which is good for him. But if he's able to produce, they're going to put him on the field and find ways to use him. And you get that extra receiver that you'd like anyway.
Yeah, they're at least going to tell you whether they're playing man or zone. That's going to happen pretty quickly. Over to you, Ian, about again, the idea of an early tight end. I know that the range behind Bowers and Sanders gets a little evaluated to evaluator. We've hit on Sanders. Is there another guy you love in the first two picks there that would make sense, or you'd feel like would really help the Browns immediately?
They're willing to use them. I think Ben Sinnott makes a lot of sense. And I'm really high on him. I think his versatility is fantastic, his size, all of his abilities. I think he can make a year one impact. But this is a great tight end group. And this is, you guys talked about it, but this is where you'd love to have an extra third or fourth round pick, and not having one at all kind of puts you in this weird bubble to say, all right, we're going to be choosing between a couple of these picks. And so but you have to have the vision. I guess that's where this comes down to. And Pete kind of alluded to this, where it's if your vision for the next iteration of this offense is to be very move centric, if it's going to be versatile, if it's going to be less predictable, which kind of fits everything that's going on across the league, then you're going to look at a Sinnott. You're going to be looking at even a Jaheim Bell, maybe a little bit later, maybe an Eric All a little bit later out of Iowa. Someone who's good after the catch and can create separation is going to be more of a receiver or of that H-back type. If not, that's fine. if you want more of that tight end number 2, there's guys in this class. It's not a top heavy class, but it is a deep class. Sanders is a great receiver. I really like him. I think he'd be fun in this offense. He fits almost as like an Njoku playmaking complement in a way that no one else in this class besides Bowers, obviously, is going to be able to do in that style. He's very unique as a tight end prospect in that way. But there's more traditional guys too, like Jared Wiley, 6'6", 250 pounds. Guy's a hammer in the run game. He can really, because of his length, he can really do some nice things. Theo Johnson, same way. But they're more traditionally sized. So they're not the guys that you're going to scheme into the middle of the field and then hope that he runs away. He's going to be breaking tackles. Those guys are physical. They have to play that way. Or, of course, you got Farmer Gronk too, like who I don't really know that fits Cleveland too well. I wouldn't complain about it, though. I do think that it's one of those things that I hope that they consider it at 85, because I think for the vision of the offense, I love an offense that has the movement, that breaks things up, that has the unexpected plays. And maybe this guy isn't going to get the huge volume that might generally go with this type of investment, but I want the impact. I want the guy who's averaging 13, 15 yards a catch and is a playmaker in the red zone, or is maybe the guy that when he comes on the field, everyone's concerned about. Of course, you can't make it obvious, right? But you want someone that is a playmaking nightmare in those mismatches. And so I hope that they take that advantage of that, because if they don't, it feels like it's a missed opportunity to kind of give this offense the breath of fresh air that they've done most of the work to get to.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like they've made a huge concern about filling that spot. That's one of the few. I know they just brought in Trevon Wesco, right, as a guy they were meeting with, but they haven't signed anybody there. And again, that's not a position that they're asking some guy to. Can you talk about, Pete, like Jatavian Sanders doesn't do much after the catch? What are there, 5 tight ends in the entire NFL that make things happen after the catch? You get a little spoiled watching David Njoku operate week to week. Like, you need guys who can just get open, high point the football, and make those plays that they're asked to make. There's not enough of those guys, let alone the freak of nature types, right? So, is
Sanat going to last to 85 is my question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again,
I feel like if there's a real possibility that if you don't get Sanders at 54, it should, and maybe you like Sanat better. I mean, there's a world you could live in where you go, no, I want Sanat at 54. But I can't help but think that Sanat, I get he's an H-back and all those things, but there are teams that I think that might be more inclined. Like, I think of him as a taller Kyle Juszczyk, and you got to have that sort of imagination with him. But I suspect there's a team that's willing to sort of pounce on him in that range.
If they take him, then it tells me that there's like a whole bunch of funky coming with this offense that we haven't seen before. Just a complete directional change to get somebody that can do the type of stuff that he does, because it's different. It's just very different than what they've had. So,
you've watched Nick Charlton's offense, have you not? How much weird stuff have you seen just with that tight end they have that is now since transferred out?
Yeah, they get funky. They do some diamond stuff. I mean, it's a lot of, you need people comfortable in those spots, right? That they need to be able to handle that. I've done it before. Brad, I know you talked to us about a week ago about, like, do you think the Browns need an inline, bigger body type? So are you more drawn to somebody late than early? What are you at?
It's more of a question. Like, I don't know. Are the Browns just fine with, in those situations, in those run situations, just running out an extra lineman like you guys talked about? Like, are they just okay with that and that's what it's going to be? Because after Njoku, who do you have that can block at tight end that's going to be on the roster?
It's limited.
I'm a guy. He's going to come in and block a tight end. Like,
there you go.
Giovanni,
I'll tell you right now, I would put Mike Hall at fullback if they draft him. Straight up, I've seen him do it. But here's the thing: if you just look at Browns draft history, and I mean, as long as Andrew Berry's been with the team, blocking is completely secondary for them. They drafted Seth DeVolve, a wide receiver out of Princeton, moved him to tight end. They drafted Njoku, obviously, and then they drafted Harrison Bryant. Like, none of those guys were blockers coming to college, because that's the more premium element. If you get a guy who's at least just willing to put in the work to get better at blocking, they are way more inclined to go that route than work the other way, because it's more difficult.
They want tight ends who play hard. Like, their theory is quite obviously like, we want you to be able to catch a football, but if you play hard, we can work with you on blocking. We can figure this out. You have to want to do it. That's the big element for them. You might not be good at it, but you have to have a desire to be able to put your head down and get in the mix, right? That's Harrison Bryant in a nutshell, right? He's a Mackey guy, but right. Good.
I like Sanders at 54. I like the idea of it because he's a weapon, right? And he brings a whole bunch of different things that they can do. So, I mean, guy that his size catching the ball in traffic like that is pretty impressive. And so I just think that, I'm totally behind that because it's a weapon at 54. But yeah, I did express to you guys my concern about depth blocking at tight end because your next best blocker behind Njoku is Christina Ricci there. So,
well, you lost your fullback too. So, I mean, at some point you got to, I mean, they do have, that is a concern. You can't bring 8 offensive linemen. I mean, I guess, Kevin could get audacious there and do that, but like, it's something that does need a little bit of a play action element tied into it. So I don't know, maybe they're asking Akins in his older age here to get a little better at it. It's something that they need to look at a little bit. We'll see if the draft provides any sort of clarity to it. We're going to close with this, guys. We haven't really, and again, you need to be the real draft deep dive types to care about this stuff. But like 156 and beyond is when most people are turning off the draft and going about their Saturday. But is there a name, if you guys are scouts in the room, you've looked at a bunch of prospects all year, that you're like, find a way to get this guy? I don't want 4 answers. I want 1 answer. I want the Browns to find a way, and it can be a 200 range guy or the guy at 156. Like, I would love for them to find a way to get that guy on the roster in some way, shape, or form. So that's like the thing. I think that, like, if they take this guy, I want the people listening to this show to be like, oh, I remember when Ian or Pete or Brad mentioned that name. So I'll open it up to you guys. Ian, I'll let you hit lead off on this one.
I'll go to Tennessee. I'll say Kamal Haddon. He's a 6'1", 200-pound corner. He coverage-wise, he's pretty good. I mean, he's a little bit stiff, which a lot of taller guys is. You're not going to play him in a ton of zone either. But I think when you look at his play strength, his ball skills, his tracking, his size, he plays to his size. 5th-year senior with the cornerback room that Cleveland has, which is really strong, right? Like, you've got to have someone that brings a pretty good skill set to the table, something a little bit different. Haddon's been projected maybe UDFA. He might be available for right after the draft, but he's be someone I'd want because he's got the measurables. He's got some confidence that I really like, especially at the corner position. There's a lot of slot guys in this class, which may be a need for Cleveland, depending on how the draft goes or how this offseason projects for them. But I think you can find slot guys anywhere. I'm not paying for a slot corner. So I want someone that's got that outside size. And for me, I just think I'm a little bit surprised that he's gone so under the radar.
Good stuff. Great answer. Pete, over to you.
Man, that's tough because in my draft, I would say, DeCamerion Richardson, but I don't think he's going to last that long. As I said to you, I think he's going to go much earlier, but he screams a Browns fit. Beyond that, I that's where I'm at, those DBs. The one I think the Browns may be really interested. He's older. Like, I think they specifically brought him in just to recruit him, is Beanie Bishop from West Virginia. Elite traits. He just happens to be, I think, already practically 25, which, not unlike when the Browns got D'Anthony Bell, that type of guy who's just that junkyard dog mentality, and just brings it consistently. A ton of production, has done everything except the age. That's the one thing that hurts him.
Good stuff. Brad, you have one?
Quick question. Is Dadrian Taylor Demerson going to last past 156? No.
In a dream world, yes.
In a dream world. All right. Then my second choice would be Jalen Simpson, who I think will last past 156. He is a former cornerback turned safety. If you're looking for an answer at nickel, he can cover. He can play the run. I like him. He's talented. He's fast. He plays all over the place. He's very much of Schwartz's style of a player. I'm a big fan. I think, the Beast has him as like a 4th round grade, but most everybody else has him like in the 7th, or UDFA. So I'm in on Simpson from Auburn.
I'll just throw Tyrese Knight out, who Ian mentioned earlier, man. Like, you want to talk about guys that could come in, maybe find a role as a Sam linebacker on a limited down basis, can play the run game, can set an edge, can be a guy who fills for you the way you need to be early in the career. And this is what they did with Sione Takitaki. They let him play early in his career, Sam, and then kind of worked him into playing more of that off-ball traditional Mike role as his time went on. I know Tyrese's a little bit older. He's 23, but you're talking about picks in the 200s. Like, I don't care at that point. I just want guys who I think can play and be a special teamer at first, and then especially with the new kickoff rules, all of those elements, I'm drawn to somebody like that. He ran a really stellar. He's got explosiveness in the testing aspect. Like, if that guy's sitting there available, maybe you add a pick between 156 and 207 or whatever that number is. Like, or if you're at the top those 200s making your pick, like, that's a spot where if you punt it on linebacker throughout the draft, like, this is a guy who could come in and make the roster. I'm trying to find guys, if I'm picking in the 200s and maybe not moving off those picks, can you find a roster spot? I think he could. So that's the last one I'll add to it. We've had a bunch of people watching. Like, I don't know if StreamYard's juicing the numbers here, but it's telling us like 800 of you have hung out with us tonight. If they are, listen, we'll take it being the Barry Bonds of streaming coverage right now. We'll do what we can. But for everybody that did hang out, thank you a ton. It is a busy week for the OBR with draft coverage. The fellas you see here, you mix in Andrew Spade and Cody Sook and a whole bunch of the others. Fred Greetham will hang out with us. We're going to have coverage every night. Brad will have his show tomorrow. The React will be Garage Beers, and we'll have the usual content, OBR Weekly maybe. But I think we have a special for you guys coming up on Wednesday of pre-recorded guys on our staff talking about picks that we want to see happen there at 54 and 85. So that's going to be available. And then we're going to be on air for every single pick Thursday, Friday, Saturday, giving you Brown's perspective for everything. And you'll see a bunch of different faces. So we're off to a hot start. A bunch of you are here, and we thank and appreciate you for that. I appreciate you, Brad, Ian, and Pete, for hanging out with me tonight talking about this stuff. It's one of the holiday-like weeks of the NFL calendar, and the OBR is here to cover it, hopefully in a way that nobody else in the market is. So stick with us all week. Hang out at 7 o'clock and come by at 8 o'clock on Thursday, 7 o'clock Friday, and at noon on Saturday, and we'll have you covered. Thanks, guys, for being here. Appreciate you a ton. Check out the OBR website, where every day we will have a mock draft up and more creative content looking at what the Browns do in the pretty important for the future of this organization 2024 NFL draft. Again, appreciate you all. Be well. Go Browns.